I had a cup of Twining's tea this morning that was called Inner Clarity. So I'm really hoping that's going to help. It seemed a good idea to talk about this sutra, this wonderful sutra, the insight that brings us to the other shore. My experience of reading bits of this sutra over the years is that it's been quite hard to grasp, and it can seem inaccessible with language that we don't use every day. Feels a bit like Teflon to the mind, and I think that's probably intentional. I think this sutra is about a wisdom of experiencing things directly without our notions and concepts, our ideas, other people's ideas, things that we would like to grasp onto. It's about those things not clouding, not changing our perception, not being the color of our glasses, but seeing clearly, seeing what is without the interpretation in between us and what it is our senses are perceiving. What is it we're touching, hearing? And sometimes I feel like my mind would like to have something that's really easy to understand, something that doesn't take much work for me to grasp, something I can hold on to that's a little soundbite, that's it, that's something I can tuck into my pocket that's fixed and permanent and safe. And I think the sutra is suggesting to me that actually it's not like that, Jane. Nothing is fixed and permanent, but things can be safe. There are images of the Buddha pointing to the moon. And the Buddha is thought to have said that the teachings, the sutras, the talks are like a finger pointing to the moon. And what we're looking for and at clearly is the moon. So it's probably not helpful to become an expert on fingers, on cataloguing the colors and textures and types of fingers, but it's good to be well practiced at aligning ourselves with the direction in which the finger is pointing. Skillful practitioners recognize a handy finger and align themselves with that and look beyond the finger to see the moon. And the teaching is like that. And because you are all experienced practitioners, I'm trusting that that is what you're going to do. And that is what you do. And this sutra is about a way of seeing an insight that is beyond words and notions and ideas and explanations. I'm going to give you a lot of those in this talk, all of which are unhelpful by definition. But I trust that you will look beyond those. At what it really is that the sutra is pointing to. And we don't really know when this sutra was written down, perhaps in the 5th or 6th centuries of the Common Era. It's not too clear where it was from, maybe from China, maybe from India. And the sutra, as we have it in front of us, and as we see it here on the board, is a very condensed version of a large amount of writing, about the Prajnaparamita. Thousands and thousands of lines of writing have been compressed into this high density nugget that we have here. And so in a talk, we can just scratch a little at the surface. But it's interesting, the wider writing gives us some of the context for this sutra. And it's said that it was given in a place called Rajgir, which is in northeastern India, quite near Patna. And Rajgir is a small town surrounded by 7 hills, the tallest of which is Vulture Peak. And this was said to be somewhere that the Buddha really liked to be. It was under the jurisdiction of King Bimbisara at the time of the Buddha, and he was a patron and a supporter and a friend of the Buddha. And it's said that the Buddha was there with a great assembly of monastics, of lay people, and of bodhisattvas. Imagine a great assembly of bodhisattvas. And it's said that the Buddha inspired Shariputra. Shariputra was one of the Buddha's most senior disciples. Someone who was thought of well in the Sangha, who was thought to be very wise, and who had got a lot of responsibility in the Sangha. And Shariputra was inspired to ask the Bodhisattva Avalokita a question. And this sutra is really the answer that Avalokita gave to Shariputra. And the question was something like, how should people train if they wish to really engage with the Prajnaparamita, with the insight that brings us to the other shore? And this is the answer, this shortened version that Avalokita has given. And why is the Bodhisattva of great compassion delivering this sutra on great wisdom? Those two things are really helpful when they go together, wisdom and compassion. If we look at this beautiful plant, I might really want to do well by this plant. I might think that I care very much about this plant, and I'd really like it to thrive, but actually I don't understand anything about begonias. Yes. I think it's a begonia. So yeah, I don't understand. So I clearly don't understand anything about begonias. And I may not know what the causes and conditions are that this plant needs to thrive. But I really want it to do well. So I might spend quite a lot of time and energy and resource sprinkling the flowers with chocolate and placing diamonds on the soil. And actually, I'm not supporting this plant with what it needs. So I might have that volition to help, but unless I have understanding, unless I really spend some time and energy with this plant and other plants like it, and perhaps with people who have wisdom of this plant, then I can't really support it to thrive. And similarly, I may know everything there is to know about this plant, And we really understand the temperature and the humidity, the soil and the light levels and everything that there is to know. But unless I care enough to do those things, this plant is not going to thrive. So wisdom and compassion need to go together for there to be good action, good outcomes in the world. And when I say action, I almost also include non-action, because non-action is a kind of action. So we have two characters in our sutra. We have the bodhisattva of great compassion, and we have the wise disciple of the Buddha, Shariputra. And the first verse gives us some context of what's happening to Avalokita. So Avalokita, while practicing deeply with the insight that brings us to the other shore, suddenly discovered that all of the 5 skandhas are equally empty. And with this realization, he overcame ill being. So Avalokita was looking in a certain way. He was looking at the 5 skandhas, the 5 elements that make up what it is to be a human being. And he was paying attention in a particular way to those 5 elements and discovered that they were equally empty of a separate self. That they didn't have a separate self. A separate, independent existence. And with this realization, he overcame ill being. He passed to the other shore. And when we say the other shore, it's implied that that's the shore of wisdom, of not suffering, of peace. So this sutra is quite long, so let's just cut to the end, huh? Like all good novels. It's interesting, the sutra is, we're reading it in English, but the mantra at the end is in Sanskrit. It's not translated. And let's have a look at what that means. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhisvaha. And this has been translated as gone, gone. And then we have the word para, which meaning the other shore. So if we're standing on this shore, then para is the other shore. Gone, gone, gone to the other shore. And then the new bit we get is sang, parasangate, which meaning all together, everybody completely gone to the other shore. So gone, gone, gone to the other shore, gone all together to the other shore. And bodhi is something like enlightenment or awakening, from the same root as Buddha, to wake up. And svaha is a common ending to mantras. And it's really a kind of collective, hooray, that's good, an affirmation, a collective rejoicing type of affirmation. And in our Christian tradition, we might think of it as Amen. Let it be so, so be it. Or perhaps something of hallelujah in it, something joyful. And in the lead up to this mantra, we have Avalokita getting very excited about this mantra and praising the mantra highly. The great mantra is a great mantra, a most illuminating mantra, the highest mantra, a mantra beyond compare. High praise. And this mantra, everybody gone to the other shore, is something that would have been the fulfillment of a life, many lifetimes of work for Avalokita. This is the fulfillment of the Bodhisattva vow. Bodhisattvas have undertaken to stay on this shore in the world of suffering until everyone has gone all together to the other shore. And then it's happening. In the mantra, everyone has gone to the other shore. How amazing for Avalokita to be saying that, to be seeing that, to be experiencing that joy. And so much energy and joy in this mantra, that all who have undertaken the Bodhisattva vow to help other people on the path to see it fulfilled. And then if we look at the title, Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra, Taisho 251. I wonder if it's at the end for our friends online rather than at the beginning. Oh, so that version doesn't say it. So on the version that you were sent in the pack, underneath the title, this insight that brings us to the other shore, it says Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra, Taisho 251. And Tai has translated this for us. Prajna is wisdom, the insight. Paramita, we've said that para is meaning the other shore. So the insight that brings us to the other shore. And Hridaya means heart. So we're often familiar with it as the Heart Sutra. And the Taisho 251 just is part of the filing system, part of the cataloguing. It's a vast array of Buddhist canon that's written in Chinese and Japanese, and that was catalogued in an accessible way. About 100 years ago, it started to be published, and that time coincided with the Emperor Taisho being on the Japanese throne. So that's the reference there. So looking now at where we see the speech marks in the sutra, we can see at the beginning of the second verse, there's speech marks, and Avalokita is starting then to speak to Shariputra. Listen, Shariputra, this body itself is emptiness. Emptiness itself is this body. So he's taking the first of the 5 skandhas, the body, and saying, this body is emptiness. Not just an abstract body, but this body is emptiness, this very concrete body that we know. And we know by emptiness, it means empty of a separate self. So that this body doesn't exist by itself alone. That this body is made up of things that we don't generally call body, of non-body elements. So we know in our body we have water, we have minerals, we have air, we have calcium, we have protein, many, many things in our body. We have the care of the people who've influenced us, who've helped us along the way. We have the culture of the society in which we live. So many things in our body. And so this body itself is emptiness. We can see that in the one, in this very concrete body, is everything. And if we were to take any one of those things away from this body, if we took water away from the body, then the body cannot be. It cannot be by itself alone. So in the one is the all. And emptiness itself is this body. So in the everything is the one. So emptiness isn't a woolly concept, it's emptiness of something. You can't just have emptiness floating about. It's emptiness of this body. So in the all is the one. This body is not other than emptiness. So there is nothing that's fixed and separate that we can call body. It's not other than emptiness. We can't say that there's lots of things in this body, but then there's this little bit that is just body, just by itself alone. It's not other than emptiness. It's only connected to everything, only made of everything else. And emptiness is not other than this body. So there is nothing that is not in this body, nothing that doesn't influence this body, nothing that doesn't relate to this body, nothing that isn't interconnected with this body. And having said that about the first of the 5 elements, the first of the 5 aspects of what it is to be human, then Avalokita goes on to say, and true of body, also true of the other 4 aspects, true of perceptions, true of feelings, true of mental formations, and true of consciousness. So we are deeply related, using our body as an example, deeply related to all that is. And I was given this book for Christmas. I just wanted to read a little bit about it's written by someone called Merlin Sheldrake, wonderful name, and it's called Entangled Life. And it's a book by a scientist, and his area is mycorrhizal fungi. And I feel that just like anyone, when you really delve into your subject, when you live and breathe your subject, when you look deeply at the one, the specific, you tend to see the all. You tend to see the interrelatedness. And I just want to read a little bit where he's talking about the microbiome. So we've all heard a lot about the microbiome recently, about how we live in community, really, with all of our various bugs. For want of a better word, he explains it better. For your community of microbes, your body is a planet. Some prefer the temperate forest of your scalp, some the arid plains of your forearm, some the tropical forest of your armpit, your gut, ears, toes, mouth, eyes, skin, and every surface, passage, and cavity you possess teem with bacteria and fungi. You carry around more microbes than your own cells. There are more bacteria in your gut than stars in our galaxy. For humans, identifying where one individual stops and another starts is not generally something we think about. Well, we do. It's usually taken for granted, within modern industrial societies at least, that we start where our bodies begin and stop where our bodies end. Developments in modern medicine, such as organ transplants, worry these distinctions. Developments in the microbial sciences shake them at their foundations. We are ecosystems composed of and decomposed by an ecology of microbes, the significance of which is only now coming to light. The 40 trillion odd microbes that live in and on our bodies allow us to digest food and produce key minerals that nourish us. Like the fungi that live within plants, they protect us from disease. They guide the development of our bodies and our immune systems. And we are not a special case, for bacteria have viruses within them, and viruses can contain smaller viruses. We know that symbiosis is a ubiquitous feature of life. So we can see that this body is not by itself alone. And we know that the 5 skandhas into R from our own experience. We know if we haven't slept well, then our perception can be altered. We know if it's before lunch or after lunch, then we may feel very different. Our feelings, our body, the way we see the world are all very closely interrelated. We know if one of our mental formations, our anger or our joy, come up strongly, then we have that feeling in our body, perhaps a feeling of expansion or a feeling of tension. We know from our own experience how interrelated those things are. And Avalokita goes on, listen, Shariputra, all phenomena bear the mark of emptiness. And here, phenomena is something that can be directly observed, sometimes called an object of mind, an object that our consciousness can apprehend. So the laughter of a child, or a flower, or the scent of toast. These are all phenomena, things that our sense consciousness can directly experience. All phenomena bear the mark of emptiness. They are all empty of a separate self. Their true nature is the nature of no birth, no death, no being, no non-being. So we can tend to think that when we're thinking in terms of birth and death and being and non-being, that something comes from nowhere and is born and then has being and then dies and then has non-being. And the sutra is saying it's not like that. No birth, no death, no being, no non-being. And that's why there's this language of continuation rather than these hard edges of non-being, birth, being, death, non-being, but rather of continuation, of causes and conditions being sufficient and something manifests. And then causes and conditions are no longer sufficient after a period of time and something ceases to manifest. But it doesn't go to nowhere and it hasn't come from nowhere. We're in this giant compost heap of recycling. Things roll on through time and space, but without a fixed, permanent identity. So their true nature is the nature of no birth, no death, no being, no non-being. It doesn't mean that we're not here. It means that while we're here, we're constantly changing. Even from the time when we came in the room, we're a different person, constantly changing. And all around us is constantly changing and influencing us, interacting with us. And Tai has invented this wonderful word, interbeing with us. It expresses it so beautifully, to interbe. Their true nature is the nature of no defilement, no purity, no increasing, no decreasing. And this is referring to our possible view of things as separate with our mind. When our mind is looking with discrimination, we can see things as separate. This is pure and this is defiled. And we can tend to think that those two things are very different. And the sutra is suggesting that they're not. that these things inter-are, that they're interconnected. Just as when we see the yin and the yang symbol, we have the black and the white, but there's the spot of the black in the white and the spot of the white in the black. So these things, they inter-are. And if we have purity and we have defilement, then purity is made of non-purity elements, one of which is defilement. And the converse is true. So their true nature is the nature of no defilement, no purity, no increasing, no decreasing. So this is referring to our tendency to see things as dual, and hence the phrase non-duality, not seeing things as separate, of there being a wall that can't be crossed in the middle between these two things. We can't say where these things end and begin. They inter-are, they're deeply connected one to another. And many of us will be familiar with this book, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. I have this much loved copy here. And Gibran is speaking here of joy and of sorrow and of their interbeing. Then a woman said, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow." And he answered, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the self-same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? Is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? And when you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for what which has been your delight. Some of you say, joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come. And when one sits alone with you at your table, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. And Avalokita continues, this is why in emptiness, body, feeling, perception, mental formations and consciousness are not separate self-entities. So those 5 aspects of what it is to be human are a map. And we use lots of words, lots of ideas to describe something, and that's really helpful in our everyday life. If I say I'll meet you at the car, that's great, because if I say I meet you at the coming together of everything that is, that's tricky. Tricky to find each other. So it's really helpful for us to have these signs, these words, these labels to navigate our life in the historical dimension. But Avalokita is reminding Shariputra that actually it's all connected. We are all deeply connected. Everything is deeply connected. And the way that we often see the world is with a map. But it's not about the map. The map is not the territory. And when we get somewhere, good to put the map in our pocket and really be there. And Avalokita continues, the 18 realms of phenomena which are the 6 sense organs, the 6 sense objects, the 6 consciousnesses, are also not separate self-entities. The 6 sense organs are what we would, in our current times, call the 5 senses, plus the mind makes the 6th. And these are important to us as practitioners because they are the way that we interact with the world. And we can talk about guarding the doors of our senses, being careful about what it is we consume, practicing with our mindfulness trainings of looking at our environment and taking care of ourselves in the world. We are very influenced by all that is, but especially by what's within close proximity to where we are. I have a training as a scientist, and it's recognized that when we try and do an experiment, there's something called observer bias. So for a long time in science, people thought that the person doing the experiment could be outside the experiment, could set something up and it was over there and they were over here and they were looking. It could be very objective about what it was that was seen. And it's recognized now that we're all in there. And so in order to try to minimize observer bias, when we want to perhaps see which drug is most helpful, then the person who's conducting the trial doesn't know who's having what. And that's called being blinded. But the person who's in the trial, or the person who's giving the drug to the animal or the child, if that's that kind of trial, also doesn't know what's what. Because it's recognized that we can often see what we would like to see, or we can see what our expectations are, to fulfill our expectations. And even a pill with nothing in it can have an effect. So a placebo effect is quite well recognized because there's not nothing in the pill. There's the care of somebody giving you something. There's the attention and listening of being part of a clinical trial. There's so much more in the placebo pill than the drug. So it's not really so surprising that the placebo has an effect as well. And so good clinical trials are what's called double-blinded. So the observer doesn't know and the participants don't know. But we're all participants and it's still all a bit messy, and science is struggling still, I think, with that. But good to know that we're all in there. And as for our sight, so our eyes, what we see, and the act of seeing, that's the eye consciousness, those are all related. And between them, they're not separate either. So we know that, for example, our sense of smell and our sense of taste are very closely related, and all of them interweave. And some people have this really interesting thing called synesthesia, maybe 4% or so of the population, where if we hear a trumpet, we might see a coloured symbol. And that's consistent through their life. It's not an arbitrary association. Or we might read something and it's always green, that particular shape, word, letter. Interesting interrelationship there, such a skill, imagine going to a concert and having a flow of colour. And Avalokita continues to Sariputra. The 12 links of interdependent arising and their extinction are also not separate self-entities. The 12 links of interdependent arising. Ooh, not that one. So we are probably familiar with this from this traditional picture of the Wheel of Life. I'm sure we've all seen before. The Wheel of Life. And around the edge are the 12 links of interdependent arising. So this idea of one thing happening and affecting another. And of course, it's not as simple as A to B to C to D. It's gazillion to A, spreading out into gazillion effects. It's unbelievably complex web. But in the 12 links, it's simplified to cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. And in this wonderful book, which I highly recommend, which you probably all read, The Other Shore by Thich Nhat Hanh, you can read more about his interpretation of the traditional 12 links. I'm not going to go into that today. We haven't got time. And incidentally, outside of this endless cycle of birth and death that is the wheel, outside of it is the Buddha pointing to the moon. He's not in here. He stepped outside. And Thai has given a very helpful interpretation of this. Sorry, I can't see. And rather than being the 12 links, he's popped it down as the 5 links. And you can see that the wisdom, this wisdom that we're talking about in the Sutra, of experiencing something directly without the coloured glasses, without the perception, the notions, the ideas in between, is this way of looking, is this wisdom. That's what the wisdom is referring to. And this wisdom allows for clear seeing of things, of formations, of things that our consciousness can apprehend. Jan, do we need to bring this closer so people can see who are online? So this way of seeing is without a separate self. So we have this wisdom, this insight, this way of seeing, and we... Oh, Jane, I think you might be catching the mic. Thank you. So this wisdom, this way of seeing, leads to us seeing that things are interdependent, that they don't have a separate self. And leading on from that, we then are in a continuation, a flow, an understanding that now is now and will never come again in this way, and that the next now is different because things have changed, and that things flow on and things manifest and they cease to manifest. So no birth, no death, no being, no non-being, no hard edges, just a continuation. And that then leads to nirvana. And nirvana means no notions, an extinction of all notions. And dwelling in that place that's described as a cool place, a place without all of the heat of our strong emotion, where our mind is clear, our seeing is clear, our sensing is clear, can lead reinforcing that wisdom of seeing things connected. Around we go. So this 5 links we can see clearly in this sutra. And the 5 links, I'll hand this round in a bit. The 5 links that it's possible to dwell in our daily life is not the opposite, but something slightly different. So we can see that these 5 can be mirrored in these 5, but in a slightly subtly different way. And it's possible to shift from samsara to nirvana in a moment, in a heartbeat, and back again. And I'm sure we've all experienced that. It's not really so much about where we are, about what's happening, because we could both be on the train, us and another person, and one person sitting next to the other. One's in nirvana and one's in samsara. So the delusion that's referred to here is the seeing the world when our senses contact something, that those things are not all related, that they are separate, fixed, permanent, and therefore we have the idea of birth and death, the idea of being and non-being, and that can lead to a lot of suffering, can lead to grasping onto things that are permanent and fixed. It can lead to longing and to a sense of separation. And that samsara then is our suffering. And then if we are in that sense of suffering, it's hard for our mind to be clear, hard for us to see clearly. And so we can go round this set of links. So I'm going to just pass that round. And that diagram is also in this book. Avalokiteshvara is described as having 108 manifestations. I like to think of Avalokita on a surfboard. So maybe we're allowed 109. A radiant being, very beautiful, wearing this stunning wetsuit, giving hope. Imagine if you're struggling in the waves of birth and death. And Avalokita is described as riding the waves of birth and death. And imagine how useful it is to have 1,000 arms balancing on a surfboard. And on a surfboard, in it for many, many lifetimes, you need to be relaxed. You need to be present. You need to be skillful. You need to be fit for purpose. And if I'm down there struggling in the waves of birth and death, and I see this radiant being coming to help me, then that brings such hope, that radiant compassion. And perhaps when Avalokita reaches one of the 1,000 arms down to support that person who's struggling in the waves of birth and death, we know that sometimes there's an eye in the palm. And that eye is to really see the suffering, not just suffering as a woolly concept, but the individual suffering of what that is there. So the compassion, but also the understanding going together. Specific, not just I want to help, but I am trying to understand this. I am stopping, calming, looking deeply in order to understand this specific moment now. And we can all do that. And doing that just for something that may seem very small has so much benefit in the world. So it's not about having a woolly aspiration of compassion or understanding emptiness or whatever it is. It's about just stopping, being, looking now at whatever it is, at our teacup, at this door handle, this person in front of us, this dog. And Avalokita continues to Sariputra, ill-being, the causes of ill-being, the end of ill-being, the path, insight and attainment are also not separate self-entities. So we get to this bit and we think, oh, the Four Noble Truths, we can grasp onto that. And Avalokita saying, no, sorry. The Four Noble Truths are all related. There is suffering. It doesn't mean that suffering doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist by itself alone. Suffering is made of non-suffering elements. And just as the poem that we heard from the prophet, we know that in our suffering is our joy, and in our joy is our suffering. And when we look with that non-duality, we don't see them as separate things. And we have this wonderful phrase, no mud, no lotus. So we know that from the suffering, from really looking, that the lotus, the joy can arise. But also no sunshine, no lotus. We need to practice to water our seeds of happiness and joy to make that lotus flower. Whoever can see this no longer needs anything to attain. Sometimes we can be after something. We can be chasing or grasping or running after something. It might seem that it's okay to be, maybe we think it's not okay to be running after sex or fame or money, but maybe we think it's okay to be running after enlightenment or whatever else good Buddhists are supposed to run after. Mm-hmm. Being a good vegan, thank you. But it's a more subtle trap, if we like, because if we're running after something, then we can be focused on the future. And often when we are looking into the future, it's not real. What we're seeing is an idea of something, an idea of happiness, a notion. It's the map again. And when we get there, it might be that the territory wasn't what we thought, that the map isn't the territory. And so being too out of balance in the present, leaning towards the future, whatever it is, can be unhelpful. And Thai invites us to look carefully at our ideas of happiness, because our ideas of happiness can make us unhappy. And actually, we can be happy now. And one thing that this sutra helps us to understand is that we have so much now. We are connected to everything that is. We have everything already. And this idea of aimlessness, which this couplet speaks to, whoever can see this no longer needs anything to attain. This door of liberation called aimlessness. It doesn't mean that there's nothing to do in the world, or that there's nothing that we would like to change in the world, or that there's not work to do. But I think perhaps what it's suggesting is that we can do it from a steady place. We can do it from a place of fullness, a place where we have much to offer from the richness of being connected here and now, of having so much, so many conditions for our happiness. And when we choose to act in the world, we do that from a steady, grounded, stable, joyful place. We're not leaning towards the future because we're empty and hungry. Yeah? We're working, we're here now, we're upright, we're in this place now, and we're offering what we can in our work, in offering our energy towards our values, but from a good, stable place. Nothing to attain. So, dear friends, there's so much to be said about this wonderful sutra, but I think maybe that is enough for now. And I think I'll continue a little more tomorrow. We have a wonderful sunny day. So I think we might just listen to the voice of our community bell, just to end here for today. And hopefully we'll manifest again tomorrow. Thank you, dear friends. I think we just have time. If we just would like to share a little, we might like to share about our own experience of being with the sutra, of things that are contained in the sutra. We have much practice experience between us, and yeah, we may just like to share what's in our heart or in our mind, just for a few moments before we